Lily Moore strode into the station, her polished black boots clicking against the tiled floor with an air of quiet authority. She wasn't dressed in the imposing uniform of her position, but in casual attire, dark jeans, and a fitted shirt. Her long black hair was tied back neatly, a deliberate choice to blend in, to observe without drawing attention. The precinct bustled with activity, officers shuffling paperwork and answering phones. Behind the front desk, Jake Turner leaned back in his chair, coffee in hand, exuding an aura of casual dominance. The burly officer didn't bother looking up as Lily approached. "What do you need?" Jake asked dismissively, his eyes glued to the computer screen. "I'm here to report a theft," Lily said calmly, her tone steady but firm. Jake snorted, finally glancing up. His eyes raked over her with a thinly veiled sneer. "Another one, huh? Let me guess. A phone, maybe a purse." He laughed, the sound carrying through the station. "Those things never turn up again. You're wasting your time." Lily didn't flinch. "I'd still like to file a report. That is my right." Her unwavering demeanor seemed to irritate Jake. He stood, coffee cup in hand, and loomed over her. "Listen, people like you should know their place," he said in a low, threatening tone. "We've got better things to do than deal with petty stuff." Without warning, Jake tilted his cup, splashing the scalding liquid onto Lily's face. A collective gasp rippled through the station as officers glanced up from their desks, some turning away to avoid getting involved. Lily flinched but stood her ground, her cheek stinging from the burn. She wiped her face with her hand, coffee dripping onto her shirt. "Consider that a lesson in respect," Jake said coldly, returning to his desk as though nothing had happened. "Now get lost." The room fell silent, the weight of the moment hanging heavy in the air. Lily looked around, seeing pity and discomfort in the officer's eyes, but no action. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice laced with resolve. "You've shown me exactly how things work around here." With that, she turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing down the hall. In a quiet corner of the station, Deputy Chief Thomas Wright waited by an office door. He straightened as Lily approached, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right, Chief?" he asked, his voice soft but filled with worry. "I'm fine," Lily replied coolly, though her cheek burned and her pride stung. "I needed to see it for myself." Thomas nodded solemnly. "And you did." Lily entered her office and stood before the mirror, washing the coffee from her face. The cold water soothed the burn but couldn't erase the indignity of the moment. She dried her face, her expression hardening. "Call a meeting," she said to Thomas. "I want every officer in the briefing room immediately." Thomas didn't hesitate. "Yes, Chief." The briefing room filled quickly, officers filing in with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Jake sauntered in last, his trademark smirk firmly in place. He took a seat near the back, crossing his arms and radiating defiance. When Lily entered, the room fell silent. Gone were the casual clothes. She now wore her police chief uniform, her badge gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Her presence commanded attention. "Good morning," she began, her voice firm and authoritative. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lily Moore. As of today, I am your new chief of police." A ripple of shock ran through the room. Jake's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. He shifted in his seat, trying to mask his unease. Lily's gaze swept the room, her eyes landing briefly on each officer before settling on Jake. "Over the past 2 weeks, I've observed this station," she continued. "I've seen how it operates when no one thinks they're being watched. And let me be clear, what I've seen is unacceptable." Jake let out a derisive chuckle. "Unacceptable, huh? What are you gonna do about it?" Lily didn't hesitate. "I'm going to change it." She placed a folder on the table and opened it, revealing a detailed reform plan. "This station will no longer tolerate abuse of power or discrimination. There will be mandatory ethics training, a restructured complaint process, and an independent oversight committee. Anyone unwilling to adapt should consider this your warning. Her words were a direct challenge to Jake, but she didn't flinch. The room was silent, the tension palpable. "You think you can just walk in here and change everything?" Jake asked, his voice dripping with contempt. "Yes," Lily replied simply. "And I will." The days that followed were tumultuous. Lily worked tirelessly, meeting with officers individually, implementing reforms, and addressing complaints that had been buried for years. Some officers resisted, clinging to the old ways, but others, like the young and idealistic Chris Meyer, found new hope in her leadership. Jake, however, grew more defiant. He rallied his allies, spreading dissent and undermining Lily's authority at every turn. But Lily was unshakable. She handled each challenge with grace and determination, earning the respect of even her harshest critics. One day, Jake's defiance reached its peak. He stormed into Lily's office, slamming the door behind him. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You think you can fix this broken system?" Lily met his glare, her calm demeanor unbroken. "No," she said, "I don't think I can fix it, but I know I can make it better." Jake faltered, her words cutting through his anger. For the first time, he saw her not as a threat, but as someone who truly believed in the power of justice, a belief he had lost long ago. Months later, the station was transformed. The toxic culture that had festered for years was replaced with one of accountability and respect. Officers like Chris flourished under Lily's leadership, while those unwilling to change found themselves replaced. Jake, stripped of his power and influence, resigned quietly. He left the station with a heavy heart, haunted by the realization of what he could have been. As for Lily, she continued to lead with strength and compassion, proving that even in the face of adversity, one person could make a difference. Her story became a testament to the power of perseverance, the importance of standing up for what's right, and the belief that change, though difficult, is always possible. The catalyst for change. The months following Lily Moore's fiery introduction as the new police chief were nothing short of transformative, but they weren't easy. Lily's unyielding stance against corruption and misconduct created ripples that grew into waves, challenging every corner of the precinct. Resistance was fierce, and no one embodied this opposition more than Jake Turner. Jake had always prided himself on being untouchable. For years, his web of allies, intimidation tactics, and manipulative charm had allowed him to dominate the precinct unchallenged. But now, that foundation was crumbling. The power he wielded with such ease had been pried from his grasp by a woman he had initially dismissed with nothing more than disdain. A spark of defiance. Jake's immediate strategy was to undermine Lily. He relied on his closest confidants in the station, officers who owed him favors or feared his wrath, to create friction wherever possible. Complaints about Lily's reforms flooded the administrative channels. Her policies were too strict, unrealistic, or out of touch. Jake knew that sowing doubt among the officers would weaken her position. But Lily was prepared. Each complaint that reached her desk was met with a direct conversation, a review of facts, and, when necessary, decisive action. Her ability to cut through the noise left Jake's network scrambling. Officers who had once been staunchly loyal to him began to question their allegiance. Some, like Chris Meyer, were inspired by Lily's unwavering commitment to justice. Chris, initially hesitant to speak out against Jake, now found his voice growing stronger under Lily's guidance. "I don't think you're as untouchable as you believe," Chris said to Jake one evening after a tense exchange. Though his voice wavered, there was a newfound determination in his eyes. Jake's response was a derisive laugh. But deep down, Chris's words unsettled him. He had underestimated Lily's impact, and it was becoming clear that his influence was waning. Breaking point. One cold autumn morning, Lily received a report that confirmed her suspicions. Jake Turner had not only fostered a culture of fear, but had been actively suppressing evidence in multiple cases. She summoned Deputy Chief Thomas Wright to her office, spreading the files across her desk. "Look at this," she said, her voice heavy with anger. "Witness statements dismissed, evidence misplaced, reports altered, all under his watch." Thomas nodded solemnly. "I always suspected, but I didn't have the proof." "Well, now we do," Lily said, standing tall. "This ends today." By noon, Lily had organized an emergency meeting with the precinct's internal oversight team, as well as representatives from the city's anti-corruption unit. She laid out the evidence systematically, sparing no detail. Jake was summoned but arrived late, his usual smirk firmly in place. "This is a joke, right?" he said, leaning back in his chair. "You're trying to take me down over some paperwork errors." Lily's eyes were cold. "This isn't about paperwork, Jake. It's about years of misconduct, abuse of power, and betrayal of the badge you swore to uphold." The room was silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone. For the first time, Jake looked genuinely cornered. The fall. The investigation into Jake's actions moved swiftly. As more evidence came to light, his allies began to distance themselves, unwilling to go down with him. Officers who had once been too afraid to speak up now came forward, sharing stories of intimidation and unethical orders. The walls Jake had built to protect himself were crumbling, and he was powerless to stop it. When Jake was officially placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation, he stormed into Lily's office. "You think you've won?" He spat, his face red with fury. "You think exposing me changes anything? This system is rotten to its core, and no amount of your righteous speeches will fix it." Lily met his glare with calm resolve. "You're right, Jake. The system isn't perfect, but every step forward, every bit of accountability, makes a difference. That's what I'm here to do, one piece at a time." Jake stared at her for a long moment before turning and walking out, slamming the door behind him. It was the last time he would step foot in the precinct. Rebuilding the precinct. With Jake gone, the precinct faced a new challenge. Rebuilding trust, both internally and with the community it served. Lily knew this wouldn't happen overnight. She organized workshops on ethics and de-escalation, invited community leaders to speak with the officers, and implemented regular town halls to hear citizens' concerns directly. One of her boldest moves was appointing Chris Meyer to lead a newly established integrity task force. Though young and relatively inexperienced, Chris had demonstrated a willingness to grow and a commitment to doing the right thing. "I'm trusting you with this," Lily said during their meeting. "Not because you're perfect, but because you care. That's what we need right now." Chris nodded, his voice steady. "I won't let you down, Chief." A community renewed. The changes under Lily's leadership didn't go unnoticed. Gradually, the community began to see the precinct as a place of justice rather than fear. Complaints were handled swiftly and transparently, officers were held accountable for their actions, and citizens felt heard for the first time in years. One evening, at a community event hosted by the precinct, an elderly woman approached Lily. Her name was Mrs. Ellis, and she had lived in the neighborhood for decades. "Chief Moore," she said, her voice trembling. "I never thought I'd see the day when I could walk into this station without fear." "Thank you." Lily smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Ellis. This is your station too." Jake's reckoning. As the months passed, Jake Turner's name faded from the precinct's daily conversations, but his story didn't end quietly. The investigation into his actions led to a formal trial, where he was convicted of misconduct and obstruction of justice. His sentencing became a cautionary tale for other officers across the city. For Jake, the consequences were more than professional. He was left to grapple with the choices he had made, the ideals he had abandoned, and the legacy he had destroyed. In the solitude of his small apartment, he often found himself thinking about Lily's words. "Every step forward makes a difference." For the first time in years, Jake wondered if it wasn't too late to take a step forward himself. A new era. Under Lily Moore's leadership, the precinct became a model for reform. The officers who remained embraced the changes, working together to build a culture of integrity and service. Chris Meyer grew into a respected leader, his task force uncovering and addressing systemic issues that had plagued the precinct for years. As for Lily, she remained as steadfast as ever, guided by the memory of her grandmother Evelyn and the promise she had made long ago to fight for justice, piece by piece. In the end, Lily's story wasn't just about one woman changing a precinct. It was about the power of resilience, accountability, and the belief that even in the face of overwhelming odds, change is always possible. A legacy of hope. The ripple effect. Months turned into a year, and under Lily Moore's leadership, the precinct experienced a transformation that no one had thought possible. It was no longer just a place where officers clocked in and out. It became a beacon of hope for the community. The changes Lily spearheaded not only redefined the culture within the station, but also inspired similar reforms across the city. However, Lily understood that lasting change required more than policies. It required trust. She dedicated herself to mending the broken relationship between the precinct and the people it served. Town halls became monthly events, drawing crowds that filled the station's meeting room. Community leaders, teachers, business owners, and even children gathered to voice concerns, share ideas, and, for the first time, feel heard. One particular meeting stood out to Lily. A young boy named Malik, no older than 10, raised his hand timidly. When called upon, he said, "My dad says police officers are supposed to help people, but they don't always help us. Will that change now?" The room fell silent, and every pair of eyes turned to Lily. She crouched down to Malik's level, her gaze steady and warm. "Malik," she began, her voice steady, "I can't promise that everything will change overnight, but I can promise you this. We are working every day to make sure officers do what they're supposed to: help, protect, and treat everyone with respect. And I'll keep working until we get it right." The boy nodded, and the room erupted in applause. It was a moment that reminded Lily why she had taken on this monumental task. Change wasn't just about policies. It was about rebuilding faith, one person at a time. Chris Meyer's rise. Chris Meyer, once a timid officer shadowed by fear, blossomed under Lily's mentorship. Leading the precinct's integrity task force was no easy feat, but Chris embraced the responsibility with vigor. His team uncovered discrepancies in old case files, reopened investigations that had been prematurely closed, and held officers accountable for misconduct. One of the task force's most significant victories came when Chris uncovered evidence in a cold case that had haunted the community for years: the unsolved murder of a local shopkeeper named Mr. Patel. The case had been dismissed as a robbery gone wrong, but Chris's meticulous review revealed overlooked security footage and mishandled witness statements. With Lily's support, Chris reopened the case and worked tirelessly to piece together the truth. His efforts led to the arrest of the true culprits, a local gang that had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years. The conviction brought closure to Mr. Patel's family and renewed trust in the precinct's commitment to justice. During a press conference following the arrests, Chris stood beside Lily, his voice firm, as he addressed the public. "This is what accountability looks like," he said. "We're not just here to wear badges. We're here to serve you." The crowd cheered, and Lily couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Chris's transformation was proof that change was possible, even for those who once felt powerless. Jake Turner's reckoning. Meanwhile, Jake Turner's life had taken a sharp downward turn. Stripped of his badge and sentenced to probation for his crimes, he spent his days in solitude, reflecting on the choices that had led to his downfall. For years, he had convinced himself that his actions were necessary, that the ends justified the means. But now, without the power and control he had clung to for so long, he was forced to confront the truth. He had become the very thing he once despised. One afternoon, while sifting through old photographs, Jake came across a picture of himself as a young officer. In the photo, he stood proudly beside his parents, his uniform crisp and his smile genuine. It was a stark reminder of the idealistic man he had once been, a man who believed in justice and fairness. Haunted by the memory of his younger self, Jake decided to take a step he had avoided for years. He reached out to Lily. An unexpected meeting. When Lily received Jake's request for a meeting, she hesitated. She had no obligation to speak with him, no reason to entertain his regrets. But something in her heart told her this could be an opportunity for redemption, not just for Jake, but for the message she was trying to send. The meeting took place in her office, the same one where Jake had once stormed in with venomous accusations. He entered quietly, his posture subdued and his eyes downcast. The man before her was a shadow of his former self. "Thank you for seeing me," Jake began, his voice low. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from." Lily leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "Why are you here, Jake?" He hesitated, fumbling for the right words. I made mistakes. I became someone I never wanted to be, and I don't expect forgiveness, but I need to make things right. Somehow." Lily studied him carefully. Making things right isn't about words. It's about actions. "What do you plan to do?" Jake took a deep breath. "I want to help. I know this community, its struggles, its pain. If there's a way I can contribute, even if it's small, I want to do it." For a long moment, Lily said nothing. Then she nodded. "If you're serious, start by volunteering. There's a community outreach program that could use someone with your experience. But let me be clear, this is your second chance. Don't waste it." Jake left the meeting with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. A movement takes root. As the precinct thrived under Lily's leadership, her reforms began to catch the attention of other districts. Police chiefs from neighboring precincts reached out to learn from her successes, and soon, a citywide task force was established to replicate her model. Lily became a sought-after speaker at conferences and community events, sharing her vision for a justice system rooted in accountability, transparency, and compassion. But despite the growing recognition, she remained grounded, always reminding herself of the promise she had made to her grandmother, to fight for justice, piece by piece. The legacy of Evelyn Moore. One quiet evening, after a particularly long day, Lily found herself sitting alone in her office, holding an old photograph of her grandmother, Evelyn. In the picture, Evelyn stood with a picket sign in hand, her face alight with determination. "You were right, Grandma," Lily whispered. "Justice isn't handed to you. You have to fight for it." Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the weight of the journey she had undertaken, and the realization of how far she had come. A future of hope. The precinct's transformation was more than a story of reform. It was a testament to the power of resilience, courage, and the belief that even the smallest steps could lead to monumental change. Under Lily's leadership, officers like Chris Meyer became the leaders of tomorrow, carrying forward her vision. As for Lily, she continued to lead with unwavering resolve, knowing that the work was never truly finished. But for the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. She had taken a broken system and begun to heal it, proving that even in the face of resistance, justice could prevail. Her story became a symbol of hope, a reminder that one person could ignite change, and that change, in turn, could inspire a movement. A new chapter of justice. The expansion of reform. With the precinct thriving under her leadership, Lily Moore knew it was time to expand her efforts beyond the walls of her station. The city was watching, and her success had drawn attention from policymakers, activists, and even skeptics. Many wondered if the changes Lily implemented could be replicated citywide, or if they were unique to her leadership style. Lily didn't wait for the questions to be answered. She began meeting with city officials, advocating for broader reforms in the police department. She proposed citywide oversight committees, mandatory training in de-escalation tactics, and programs aimed at addressing systemic biases. Her proposals were bold, and met with resistance, especially from those who had long benefited from the status quo. "You're asking us to dismantle the very system that keeps order," one city council member argued during a heated meeting. "Change like this could destabilize the entire department." Lily's response was measured but firm. "The system isn't maintaining order, it's maintaining complacency. True order comes from trust, and trust is built on accountability and fairness. This isn't about destabilizing. It's about rebuilding stronger." The room fell silent, and though not everyone agreed, her words planted seeds of change. Jake Turner's redemption. While Lily was tackling systemic reform, Jake Turner was on his own path of redemption. Volunteering at the community outreach program she suggested, he found himself face to face with the very people he had once dismissed and disregarded. At first, his presence was met with hostility. Many remembered him as the arrogant officer who abused his power. "You think handing out food at a shelter erases what you've done?" a young man named Carlos said during Jake's first shift. His words were sharp, and they stung. Jake didn't defend himself. Instead, he nodded. "It doesn't," he admitted, "but I'm here to try and do something right." Over time, his humility began to soften the anger directed toward him. Jake used his experience as an officer to mentor at-risk youth, teaching them about accountability and the importance of standing up for what was right. Slowly, the community began to see him in a new light, not as the man he was, but as the man he was striving to become. One day, Jake was approached by Malik, the same boy who had questioned Lily at the town hall. Malik's father had recently been arrested, and he was struggling to cope. "Can you help him?" Malik asked, his voice small. Jake knelt down, looking the boy in the eye. "I'll do everything I can," he promised, and for the first time in years, he felt he was keeping his word. A city transformed. As Lily's reforms spread, they began to take root in other precincts. Officers who had long felt trapped by corrupt leadership found themselves empowered to speak out. Community members who once avoided the police began to engage, attending workshops and participating in dialogues that bridged gaps between citizens and law enforcement. Lily's vision for change extended beyond policing. She collaborated with local schools, nonprofits, and businesses to address the root causes of crime: poverty, lack of education, and limited opportunities. Together, they launched programs that provided job training, mental health support, and scholarships for underprivileged youth. One of the most significant initiatives was a mentorship program that paired officers with at-risk teens. Chris Meyer, now a respected leader within the precinct, took a personal interest in the program, mentoring a boy named Jamal who reminded him of himself, a young person searching for direction. "Why do you care so much?" Jamal asked one afternoon. "Because someone cared about me when I needed it," Chris replied. "Now it's my turn to do the same." Lily's struggles. Despite her successes, Lily's journey was not without challenges. The pressure of her position, the constant scrutiny, and the weight of expectations took a toll. She often worked late into the night, her office light the only one glowing in the precinct. The reform work was relentless, and there were moments when she doubted if she could keep going. During one particularly difficult week, Lily received a letter in the mail. It was from Evelyn Moore's closest friend, Mrs. Green, who had known Lily since she was a child. Inside was a simple message. "Dear Lily, Evelyn would be so proud of you. Keep going, my dear. The world needs people like you." Lily read the letter several times, her eyes welling with tears. It was a reminder that she wasn't alone, that the fight she was waging was part of a legacy far greater than herself. The catalyst for nationwide change. The reforms Lily championed in her city began to gain national attention. News outlets ran stories about the once troubled precinct that had become a model of accountability and community engagement. Activists reached out to learn from Lily's strategies, and her name was mentioned in conversations about national police reform. One day, Lily received a call from the governor's office. They wanted her to lead a state task force on law enforcement reform, expanding her work to a larger scale. The offer was both an honor and a dilemma. Lily had poured her heart and soul into her precinct and her city. The thought of leaving was bittersweet. During a meeting with her team, she shared the news. Chris Meyer was the first to speak up. "You've taught us everything we need to keep this going, Chief," he said. "It's time for you to take this fight to the next level." The room erupted in agreement, and Lily felt a surge of pride. Her team wasn't just following her. They were ready to lead. A legacy carried forward. On her last day of the precinct, Lily walked through the halls, reflecting on how far they had come. She stopped at the bulletin board near the entrance, where a plaque now hung. It read, "In honor of Chief Lily Moore, a leader, a reformer, and a fighter for justice." As she stood there, Malik ran up to her, holding a small drawing. It depicted a superhero wearing a badge, standing tall against a storm. "This is you," Malik said, smiling. Lily knelt down, taking the drawing. "Thank you, Malik. But remember, real heroes are the ones who keep fighting, even when no one's watching." "That's you, too." A nation inspired. Lily's work on the state task force became a model for national reform. Her strategies were adopted in cities across the country, proving that change was possible even in the most resistant systems. She continued to face opposition, but her resolve never wavered. Years later, when Lily retired, her legacy lived on, not just in policies or programs, but in the countless lives she had touched. Chris Meyer, now a police chief himself, often credited her for inspiring him to believe in a better system. And Jake Turner, he had become a community leader, dedicating his life to advocating for second chances and bridging divides. He often spoke about the woman who had given him his own second chance. Lily Moore's story became more than just a tale of reform. It became a symbol of hope, resilience, and the belief that even the most broken systems could be rebuilt, one piece at a time. The power of unity. A new generation takes the reins. Years had passed since Lily Moore's transformative tenure as police chief. The precinct, once riddled with fear and corruption, had become a beacon of accountability and justice. Though Lily had moved on to her role as a national reform advocate, the culture she had fostered endured. Her protégés, like Chris Meyer, were now in positions of leadership, determined to carry forward her legacy. Chris had grown into a confident and respected figure within the precinct. He had not only embraced Lily's principles, but also expanded upon them, creating mentorship programs and innovative community partnerships. Officers now routinely worked alongside residents to identify local needs and craft solutions, fostering trust that had once seemed impossible. One of Chris's proudest achievements was the Community First Academy, a training program that required new recruits to spend 6 months embedded in the neighborhoods they would serve. Recruits would tutor children, volunteer at shelters, and participate in restorative justice circles. The idea was simple. Before enforcing the law, officers needed to understand the lives of the people they were sworn to protect. "This isn't just about teaching police officers to serve," Chris explained during a local news interview. "It's about teaching them to listen, to empathize, and to lead with humanity." A national movement grows. Meanwhile, Lily's work on the national stage was reshaping the conversation around law enforcement reform. Her proposals, grounded in her real-world experience, were gaining traction. She spoke at universities, participated in congressional hearings, and worked with grassroots organizations to draft legislation aimed at reducing systemic bias and promoting transparency. One of her most impactful initiatives was the Justice Partnership Network, a coalition of police departments, community leaders, and activists united by a shared goal: creating equitable systems. The network served as a think tank, sharing best practices and data-driven strategies to address challenges across the country. Despite her growing influence, Lily remained connected to the precinct where it all began. She regularly called Chris to check in, offering advice and encouragement. "You're doing great work, Chris," she said during one of their conversations. "Just remember, the fight doesn't end when you succeed. It ends when you inspire others to keep it going." Chris took her words to heart, often sharing them with his team during challenging times. An unlikely partnership. Jake Turner's transformation was far from over. Though he had earned the trust of many in the community through his volunteer work, he knew his past actions would never be fully forgotten. Determined to do more, Jake approached Lily with an idea: a program for former law enforcement officers to mentor young recruits. "When I was in uniform," Jake said during their meeting, "I thought I knew everything. But what I really needed was someone to show me what I was doing wrong, before it was too late. Maybe we can be that for the next generation." Lily was skeptical at first, but ultimately agreed. Together, they launched the Second Compass Initiative, a program pairing seasoned officers, many of whom had faced consequences for their actions, with recruits to provide honest, unfiltered guidance. Jake became one of the program's most dedicated mentors, sharing his story as a cautionary tale. One recruit, a young woman named Marisol, later credited Jake for shaping her approach to policing. He told me, "Don't let the badge turn into a shield that blocks you from seeing people. Use it to protect them," Marisol said during her graduation speech. "That's advice I'll carry with me every day." The turning point. Despite the progress made, Lily and her allies faced a major challenge when a high-profile case involving police misconduct in a neighboring city threatened to undo years of trust building. Protests erupted, and tensions between law enforcement and the community reached a boiling point. Lily traveled to the city to help mediate, joined by Chris and a delegation of officers who had been trained in her precinct's restorative justice model. Together, they organized listening sessions where protesters and officers could share their perspectives. The sessions were tense at first, but slowly, barriers began to break down. One protester, a teacher named Angela, voiced the frustration many felt. "We're tired of empty promises," she said, her voice shaking. "We've heard it all before." Chris stepped forward, his tone measured but resolute. "I hear you," he said, "and I know words alone aren't enough. That's why we're here, to prove that change isn't just possible. It's happening, but we need your help to keep it going." Angela's expression softened. "Then show us," she said. "Prove it." Over the next few weeks, the team worked tirelessly to implement reforms in the city's police department. They facilitated community-led training sessions, created a transparent complaint review system, and appointed a civilian oversight board with real authority. The collaboration was unprecedented and became a blueprint for other cities facing similar challenges. The celebration of progress. On the third anniversary of Lily's reforms taking root in her original precinct, a large community event was held to celebrate the progress made. The precinct's doors were thrown open, and residents filled the halls that had once felt so unwelcoming. Children played games with officers, local artists displayed murals celebrating unity, and Malik, now a teenager, read a poem he had written about hope and perseverance. During the event, Lily was surprised with a special ceremony. Chris, flanked by community leaders and officers, presented her with an award, the Evelyn Moore Justice Medal, named in honor of her grandmother. "This medal isn't just for you, Chief," Chris said, his voice choked with emotion. "It's for everyone you've inspired, those of us who carry your vision forward every day." As the crowd erupted in applause, Lily felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had set out to create change, but it was the people she empowered who had turned that change into a movement, a legacy secured. As the sun set on the event, Lily stood quietly by the precinct's entrance, watching families laugh and officers engage with the community. Jake joined her, holding a cup of coffee, a gesture that carried unspoken significance between them. "It's different now," Jake said, breaking the silence. "It is," Lily agreed. "But there's still work to do." Jake nodded. "Always." Lily smiled, her gaze drifting to the crowd. "The difference is, we're not doing it alone anymore." Her words captured the essence of her journey. Change begins with one person, but it takes a community to sustain it. And as long as there were people willing to stand up, speak out, and work together. Lily knew the fight for justice would endure, stronger than ever. The unfinished fight. The call to serve. As Lily Moore settled into her new role as the national advocate for police reform, she began to realize that her fight had only scratched the surface of a much larger problem. While her reforms had brought change to her city and inspired others, there were still regions across the country where corruption and abuse of power thrived unchecked. It was during one of her speaking engagements at a university that a young woman approached her. The woman, Nadia Patel, introduced herself as the niece of Mr. Patel, a shopkeeper whose cold case Chris Meyer had solved years earlier. "My uncle would have been proud of what you and your team accomplished," Nadia said, her voice trembling. "But there are so many more families like mine who never get justice. What about them?" Lily was struck by Nadia's words. They reignited the fire within her, a reminder that justice wasn't just about addressing visible issues. It was about uncovering the hidden, systemic failures that perpetuated injustice. "I can't promise I'll fix everything," Lily told her, "but I'll do everything in my power to make sure no one is forgotten." The Justice Expansion Initiative. Determined to broaden her impact, Lily launched the Justice Expansion Initiative, JEI, a nationwide program aimed at tackling deep-seated issues in law enforcement, from racial bias to the mishandling of marginalized communities' cases. JEI partnered with local activists, legal experts, and social workers to identify communities in dire need of reform and provide them with the tools to create change. One of the first cities JEI targeted was Greenfield, a small town with a population of just 30,000, but a history marred by police misconduct. The department had a reputation for covering up crimes, particularly those involving influential figures. Residents lived in fear, their voices silenced by a system that prioritized power over accountability. Greenfield's mayor, Eleanor Vasquez, had invited Lily to intervene after years of internal struggles. "I need help," the mayor admitted during their first meeting. "I've tried to make changes, but the resistance here is unlike anything I've ever faced." Lily accepted the challenge. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she said, "but it starts with one step. Let's take that step together." A battle on two fronts. The situation in Greenfield proved more difficult than Lily anticipated. The local police chief, Darren Foley, was openly resistant to JEI's presence. Foley, a man with deep ties to the town's elite, dismissed Lily's efforts as big city idealism. "This town doesn't need outsiders telling us how to do our jobs," he declared during a tense town hall meeting. "We've managed just fine without interference." The crowd was divided. Some cheered Foley's defiance, while others, emboldened by Lily's presence, voiced their grievances. One resident, a middle-aged woman named Clara, stood up and shared her story. Her teenage son, Marcus, had been wrongfully accused of theft 2 years earlier. Despite evidence proving his innocence, the case had been swept under the rug, leaving Marcus's future in jeopardy. "My son is still living with the stigma of something he didn't do," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "If that's your idea of managing just fine, Chief Foley, then we need a new system." Her words struck a chord, galvanizing others in the audience to share their own experiences. Foley's composure faltered as the weight of the community's frustration became undeniable. Building bridges. As tensions rose, Lily knew she needed allies within the department to effect meaningful change. She reached out to a young officer named Leah Torres, who had been quietly advocating for reform from within, but lacked the support to make an impact. "I've read your reports," Lily said during their first meeting. "You see the problems here as clearly as I do. Are you willing to stand up and be part of the solution?" Leah hesitated, her fear evident. "I want to help, but the people who try to speak out here don't last long." "You don't have to do it alone," Lily assured her. "We'll stand with you." With JEI's backing, Leah became a key player in the effort to rebuild Greenfield's department. She spearheaded community engagement programs, conducted internal reviews of misconduct cases, and worked to dismantle the culture of silence that had protected corrupt officers for years. Resistance and retaliation. As Greenfield began to change, the resistance from entrenched powers grew fiercer. Anonymous threats were sent to Leah's home, warning her to back off. Mayor Vasquez faced political pressure to end GEI's involvement, while Lily herself became the target of smear campaigns accusing her of overreach. The turning point came when a whistleblower within the department leaked evidence implicating Chief Foley in a cover-up of multiple cases. The evidence, which included doctored reports and concealed witness statements, was damning. Faced with undeniable proof, Foley resigned in disgrace. His departure marked a seismic shift in Greenfield's power dynamics, paving the way for a new era of accountability. A community reclaimed. Under Leah's leadership as the new acting police chief, Greenfield began to heal. Clara's son, Marcus, received a formal apology from the department, and his record was cleared. Community members who had once been silenced found their voices, participating in forums and decision-making processes. At a celebratory event marking the one-year anniversary of GEI's involvement in Greenfield, Clara approached Lily with a bouquet of flowers. "Thank you," she said, "for listening, for fighting, for giving us hope." Lily smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. The real heroes are the people who refuse to stay silent. You're the reason this town has a future. The unfinished fight. As GEI expanded its reach, Lily remained grounded in her mission. She understood that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but she also knew that the progress made in places like Greenfield was proof that change was possible. In her speeches, Lily often quoted her grandmother, Evelyn. "Justice isn't something you wait for. It's something you create." Her words resonated with communities across the country, inspiring a new generation of activists, officers, and leaders to continue the fight for justice. A legacy in motion. Years later, as Lily walked through her original precinct during a visit, she was struck by how much it had changed. The walls were adorned with photos of officers working hand-in-hand with residents, and the atmosphere was one of mutual respect and camaraderie. Chris Meyer, now the precinct's captain, greeted her with a warm smile. "Welcome back, Chief." "It's good to be home," Lily replied, her voice tinged with emotion. As she stood in the precinct's bustling hallway, watching officers and community members working together, Lily felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The fight was far from over, but the progress they had made was undeniable. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. She had set out to create change, and together with countless others, she had built a movement that would endure for generations. A legacy fulfilled. The road to reflection. Lily Moore's journey had been one of perseverance, sacrifice, and unwavering belief in the power of justice. From the moment she stepped into that precinct as a silent observer to the day she became a national figure for reform, her mission had always been clear: to ensure that justice wasn't just an idea, but a lived reality for everyone. But as she stood at the edge of retirement, Lily couldn't help but reflect on the lessons she had learned along the way. The fight for justice was not about one person or one victory. It was about the collective power of people who dared to believe in something better. It was about creating ripples that could turn into waves, inspiring others to carry the torch forward. The final act of service. In her final year as the head of the Justice Expansion Initiative, JEI, Lily launched one last program, Bridges of Justice, a national mentorship initiative aimed at connecting community leaders, reform advocates, and law enforcement officers. The program emphasized education, empathy, and empowerment, ensuring that future generations wouldn't just inherit the system but would actively shape it. At the launch event, Lily spoke to a crowd filled with leaders she had mentored, officers she had inspired, and community members who had been the backbone of her efforts. "Change is not about perfection," she said. "It's about progress. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. It's about listening to voices that have been silenced and making space for them to lead. Her words echoed through the room, a powerful reminder that justice wasn't a destination but a journey. The next generation. As Lily stepped back from her public role, she felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the work would continue without her. Chris Meyer had become a prominent leader in the reform movement, advocating for community-based policing models nationwide. Liev Torres, once hesitant to step into the spotlight, was now a celebrated police chief, mentoring young officers and championing transparency. Even Jake Turner, whose journey of redemption had been one of the most surprising transformations, had found his calling. He now worked as a speaker and trainer, using his story to teach officers the importance of humility, integrity, and accountability. Lily Moore changed my life, Jake said during a workshop. She taught me that it's never too late to do the right thing. And if I can change, so can the system. The lesson of justice. In her quiet retirement, Lily often visited the precinct where it all began. She would sit in the community room, now filled with vibrant murals, and the laughter of children attending outreach programs. One day, she was approached by a young officer who had recently joined the force. "Chief Moore," the officer said nervously, "what's the most important lesson you've learned?" Lily paused, her eyes thoughtful. "That justice is a shared responsibility," she said. "It doesn't belong to the officers, the lawmakers, or even the activists. It belongs to all of us. And when we work together, truly together, we can create something extraordinary." The officer nodded, a spark of determination lighting up their eyes. A legacy of hope. Lily Moore's story became more than just a tale of reform. It became a symbol of what could be achieved when courage, compassion, and conviction intersected. Her name was etched into history not for her titles or accolades, but for the lives she touched and the systems she changed. But for Lily, the greatest reward wasn't the recognition. It was the knowledge that she had fulfilled the promise she had made to her grandmother Evelyn, to fight for justice, piece by piece, until it became a reality for everyone. And so, her story ends not with a final victory, but with an enduring truth. The fight for justice is never finished, but every step forward matters. Every voice counts. And together, we can build a world where justice truly belongs to all. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.